So the first thing we want to do is open Blink and just blink through all of our frames. I'll reload all of them, just in case. So you go to Light, Control A, and open all of them, and this will just load Blink into our Blink frame. Right, so Blink has loaded, and so I'll just go through it with 0.5 second jump between each frame. And it does look like we have some tracking errors, and it also does look like it starts to go out of focus near the end. And so what I'll do is I'll just go through each frame, and if it's a bad frame, like this one, I'll just remove it from the stack of images. Right, and so I've removed all the bad frames, so I'll blink through it one more time. And it does look like there's adequate dithering, and so I don't think I need to bother with actually worrying about cosmetic correction. So I'll put all these frames to, let's call it boulder good. Right? And let's wait for that to run. And we'll close Blink. Next thing to do is open batch processing and weighted batch preprocessing. This will help us calibrate our frames. So first, I'm just going to reset everything to the factory defaults. And then first, I'll load all the bias frames. Then dark frames. Then flat frames. Just make sure everything's correct. Bias, dark, flat, and let's load our good light frames last. Oop. Okay. So now we want to check subframe weighting and force image measurements, and nebula seems like a good bet because we're stacking a nebula. Then we'll apply image registration. We don't want a drizzle, and we don't want image integration. Then make sure these two are correct. And now for flat, we want our 60-second dark. We want to optimize it. And yes, we'll apply that to all our flat frames. So this is what the calibration diagram will look like. We'll subtract the bias and then the dark. And we want to enable CFA scaling because it is a color image. So then for this, the dark and flat as master dark. Yes, we want to do that. And so now we have our bias. We'll optimize master dark for the best dark frame subtraction because we're using a DSLR, and we'll have flat frames. Okay, so run diagnostics, and that does seem good. Now just for the output directory, create a new directory called weighted batch preprocessing. Select that. We'll run frames. Alright, so weighted batch preprocessing is finished, so we'll close that. We'll just close the script. Now, let's just open one sample registered frame to make sure the flat frames were applied properly. And the frame does look sufficiently flat, and so I think we are good to go. So now we're going to use the script normalize scale gradient to generate our normalization data. This is what it looks like. First, we need to use blink to choose our best frame for reference. So let's do that. Just clear all these frames. And so we'll just open our registered frames and load them all into the blink process. Okay, and so as you can see, this is a green, very, very green. And so what we need to do is apply an unlink screen transfer function, and then we'll apply that as a histogram transformation to all the frames just to provide some general sense of normalization. Alright, so now I'll just blink through all of my frames. They all look generally the same, but this one does stand out to me a little bit, and so that's number 114, so I'll just make a quick note of that. Then we can go ahead and click on close the blink process. Okay. So now we'll open my scale gradient. First, we have to add all our frames. So let's make sure we're adding all the registered ones. And then we'll set number 114 as our reference. So I'll just click on 114 and say set reference. Okay, so it's set as reference. And now let's just click any other frame. So I'll click 100 for this. And let's look at our photometry stars. These just are measured to look at the gradient, and it's the best way, and probably the most accurate way, to create normalization data. Okay, so these are all our stars. Let's just close that out, and let's look at our reference again as well, just to make sure it's looking at the same stars. And it is, so we are all good. And I think we're all good for this, actually. So I'll close photometry stars out, and let's look at the photometry graph. This is one of the most important things to look at. Alright, so let's just look at the red graph. It does look pretty well fit, but let's just remove up to 50 outliers. It does seem like it should be a better fit. Right, and so let's look at green, blue, all of them with small points, and it does look pretty good, so we'll just click OK. Now, sample generation is also one of the most important things, so we're going to not click auto. That's important. We do have diffraction spikes, and so I want our star growth rate to be just a little bit higher. Yeah, and that does provide a lot more protection. Let's limit our stars by a little bit more. And I don't think we need any manual sample rejection, but I do think a sample size of 50 may serve us better in the future. Alright, so those are our samples. So I'll click OK. Now, gradient graph is the most important thing. So we'll let that run. Okay, and so this is our gradient. It does look like we have a generally linear gradient. So let's look at red. It looks pretty linear. Green as well. And blue. So maybe we should bring gradient smoothness down to 1.8. This will just follow very local trends a little bit better. Okay, so now let's just click OK. And now we want our minimum weight to 50 is a good choice. I'm going to enable all the frames anyway because there's only 79 to stack. And so we can just click Run. And this will normalize all the reference frames. Ooh. Yeah, so create a new output. Let's call that MSG. And I think that is good to go. Alright, so now Normalize Scale Gradient has finished running. So we can just click Exit there, and it opens an image integration process. And so we'll do that a little later. But right now, let's just scroll through all the weights. And it does seem that we do have a good spread of images. And although this N weight does seem to be the best, 0.018, it's okay. It's really less than 1% above our normal image, right? So then for pixel rejection, we'll just do linear fit clipping, and we don't want to clip below range. No normalization. Everything else should be correct. As for pixel rejection too, this does seem to be a good cutoff, just because we have so many frames, and none of them really look like they had hot frames. So let's just apply that. Alright, so image integration is finished. So this slope map just tells us where the highest pixel weights are, and it looks about as expected. Then rejection high, let's see. Yes, that also does look good. Rejection low looks good as well. So now a stacked image looks quite good. Low noise, good stars. And so now we can save that. Stacked file, and I think we're good to go. Alright, so the first thing to do now in our post-processing is to crop the image and get away all the stacking artifacts. And I'm going to do a fairly aggressive crop. It does look good, and it gets away some of the worst stars. Alright, our next thing to do is to plate solve the image, and that will help with photometric calibration and other things down the road. So we'll go to image solver. And I've already solved this image, so the pixel size and focal distance are correct, as is the location. And now we want to enable distortion correction, and we want to optimize the solution. And so we can just apply that. Alright, and now our plate solving has finished, and so we can look, and it doesn't look like there was much error, so that's good. And if we look at our distortion map, there doesn't seem to be a lot of distortion, so that's also good. And so now we'll just save that image. Next up is dynamic background extraction. It does look like there is a pretty large star field. It's pretty dense too, so what we'll do is clone the image and then open multiscale median transfer. Now we'll want to enable 5 layers and get rid of the residual. And so what this will do is it will only show small scale structures like stars. Okay, so this is all of our small scale structures. Now we'll just create our large scale structures by subtracting away the small scale structures. Now this will just make it a lot easier to do dynamic background extraction. Right, we'll open DBE. And now we want to avoid this area where the nebula is. And so place sample points everywhere else. Okay, so I've placed all the samples, so we'll do subtraction for correction. We want to normalize and replace target image. This is what our background model looks like. So this is our corrected, flattened image. It does look better. You can see there are a lot less gradients. So now we'll just try to work to eliminate this green glow right here. Put some more sample points. And we'll do another DBE with the same settings. That does look a little better, but it does seem like there's still a little bit of glow. Okay. And that does seem like it did the trick. Well, there is some gradients. For the most part, this should be quite good. So we can close multiscale median transfer. And then now all we'll do is add back our small scale structures. There we go. We have our flattened, corrected image. Alright, so the next thing we have to do is color calibration. So what we'll want to do is create a preview where there are no stars and there's good dark sky. So this right here does seem like a good place. So we'll do color calibration, background neutralization, and use that preview. And now we'll want to do a linked screen transfer function. So just click that. That will show with all channels balanced. And that does look pretty good, but we can do better. So do color calibration and then photometric color calibration. Average spiral galaxy should be pretty good, and then we can acquire all the image parameters from the image because we've already plate solved it. We want to do 18th magnitude limiting. That does get a lot more stars. We'll do background neutralization from a preview. So you can just click that. And we want PSF photometry. And we can let that run. Alright, so we can see that photometric color calibration has run. And these are the linear fits for all the stars, and it does look quite good. The linear fit line is good, and there's not too large a spread of stars. So we can go ahead and close that. And the photometric color calibration. And this is our color calibrated image. Alright, so now we have our completely calibrated image, and so now it's time to do deconvolution. What deconvolution does is it just tries to measure star blur and unblur the whole image. So the first thing we're going to do is open our dynamic PSF, and we'll just make that a little bit smaller there. And so what we want to do is choose stars that are typical of this image, and stars, importantly, that don't have their cores completely saturated. So as you can see, there's no saturation here, and so I think we're good. So let's just start choosing some stars. And it does look like we have some typical blurring of the stars. Good star. Okay, and so we have selected 48 stars so far. I think a little bit more is good. Alright, so we've selected 69 stars. That's a good amount. And so now we'll just sort by mean absolute difference. So we do have a bit of a range here. It's from 1.2 to the negative third and 1.7 to the second. So that's almost 10 times as large. So I think I'll cut out these last few, and I'll cut out everything the degree of 2. And that should, and I'll select everything. This should produce a good enough PSF, and it does. So we can close the dynamic PSF process for now. And we'll save that PSF just because it does have a little bit of work in it. Alright, so now we need to create our masks. So let's extract luminance twice. Or let's clone this luminance, that's easier. And we'll call this one Decon mask, and we'll call this ringing support. Okay, so let's work on the deconvolution mask first. We can just open Pixel Math and multiply that by some amount. Let's start with 60. And that's not strong enough, so let's multiply it by 200. Still not really strong enough, so let's multiply that by 500. And now we're getting somewhere. This is where our deconvolution ideally should be applied. So now let's just clip off some of those shadows. And let's just look at decon mask. And let's restart that. This looks like a generally good deconvolution mask. So we can apply that. And I'll save this. Ringing support is generally quite important as it stops deconvolution from having large dark rings around stars. So first, what we're going to do is just apply a histogram transformation or two to this image. And we can see, oh, no, that's not a good idea. what this is going to do. So let's apply second histogram transformation and reset the screen transfer function. So now we want to apply a strong HDR multiscale transform just to flatten out the image a little bit. The reason we want to do HDR with such aggressive settings is just so that we can find jump continuities like stars much more easily in the next iteration. So this is our flattened image. You can see ringing around the stars, and that's fine. So the next thing we need to do is open a trace wavelet transform, and we will disable the first layer and the residual, which will only leave our large ringing structures. So here we can see the structures that most likely will result in some ringing. Alright, so now we need to adjust our ringing mask. So let's do histogram transformation and just put an auto stretch into the image. Okay, that generally looks good. So now it's time to just clip some black areas. And this generally does look good. And so we should probably convolve the mask just a little bit. And we can access that through convolution. And 2 and 2 should do fine for this. Let's do one more histogram transformation. Okay, just make everything a little bit brighter. Cut off some more of those shadows. And we'll do one more convolution. And there we go. Alright, so right now our deconvolution mask attacks the bright stars as well, and so we'll just subtract away the ringing support so that we only deconvolve nebulosity here. Okay, that looks like a good deconvolution mask, and let's save our ringing support mask as well. And now it's time for the actual deconvolution. And so we'll do that on a preview. Okay, this is a good preview. So first of all, let's apply our deconvolution mask. That looks good. So let's not show our mask. It's better. Let's open deconvolution. Use an external PSF, and that will be the PSF that we generated before. Usually 50 is a good bet, and this is usually good. So now let's enable de-ringing and local de-ringing. 0.8 is generally a good bet for this first start. So let's just test out some options here. Alright, that looks like a generally good deconvolution. There is some dark ringing around the center star, and so I think I'm going to bring that up, the global dark up to 0.6. We'll see how that does. And let's bring the local amount down to 0.7. Okay, and so that looks like a generally good deconvolution. This is before and this is after. So let's delete all those previews, apply it to the main image. Alright, so that looked like a generally good deconvolution. Let's just see to make sure. And so we can see some of the dark structures are a lot more enhanced, and so is that beautiful Hubble structure right there. Let's just save that as our deconvoluted image. There we go. Okay, so now it is time for noise reduction. So we'll open our deconvoluted image and open swing transfer function as well, of course. We can close that right away. So now we're going to extract the luminance from that image and RGB channels. Okay, and now we can close our deconvoluted image. So now let's just save that luminance and the RGB. Okay, so I am going to just demonstrate denoise on the luminance image, but it's generally good practice to do denoise on RGB as well. So first, let's open our TGV denoise. That's my general favorite one. So now let's work to define edge protection and create masking. So the first thing we want to do is create a preview where there's no star on generally a space black background. So this will do for now. And now we'll open statistics and preview a 1. Now we want to see standard deviation as well. And so that's 3.5 and with an exponent of -5. Now let's just be sure, because that is a quite low edge protection value. So if we expand this by a little bit, yeah. So I think we're good. Now let's just define our working preview. That's what we want to target. And now let's clone that image and apply histogram transformation to it. And let's apply one more histogram transformation. I think we're good. So now let's apply that as a mask and invert. This will provide a lot more protection for brighter parts and less protection for our darker, noisier parts. Let's not show that. Now generally for TGV denoise, 0.5 strength is much too much, and so we'll just divide that value by 10 by moving down one exponent. 100 iterations is generally okay, and we definitely shouldn't use local support, and we can just use our cloned mask image for that. So now let's apply and see what we get to this preview. Alright, so let's just look a little closer at our denoise. This is before and after. So that looks like a generally good noise reduction. Not too strong, which is good. And so I think we can up the strength a little bit to maybe 7 and the smoothness to maybe 3. So let's see how that looks. Okay. This looks like too strong of a noise reduction. So let's see. Yeah, and so I do think smoothness of maybe 1.75 and a strength of maybe 5.5 will be perfect. Let's try that out. So that does look quite good. This is without denoise, and this is with. It looks strong, but not too strong. So let's just go back to a general image and apply TGV denoise to that. And that looks like very good noise reduction. So we can just save our denoised L. Now if you want to use the exact same previews, say for the R image, which I think might be a good idea, you can simply click on that preview and then drag it, and it will use the same preview. So we'll just do noise reduction on RGB. That's all there is. Okay, so now that we've denoised, our next thing is to color combine R and then stretch and then apply luminance. So I'll open all those. And now let's color combine. So we'll do channel combination, red, green, blue. We'll apply global, and that gives us our RGB image. Now this looks good for the most part, but you can see really some slight, ever so slight color tints, and so we'll just work to fix that very quickly. So let's draw our preview right here, and background neutralize that. Make sure to click Image 05. That's our image right there. And that gets rid of the background cast. And now let's just recolor calibrate using photometric color calibration. We can close the RG and B individual images now. And so we'll just open photometric color calibration. And acquire that from the image. Use PSF photometry, 18th magnitude limit, and get that from our preview. And let's apply that. Okay, so we can see that denoise did not hurt our star photometry. We can close that. And we'll save that as RGB denoise. Okay, so now let's stretch. I love the easy soft stretch tool. I really think it is quite good for these types of images. Sometimes it's not perfect, but it generally is very, very good. So let's drop expand low down to 0.2. Maybe even 0.1. That does generally look good. And then maybe let's drop our median down to 0.18. Actually, let's raise it up to 0.22 and see how that looks. I think 0.21 is going to be our best bet. Yeah, and there it is. So let's run easy soft stretch on our RGB image. And let's also run that on our luminance image. Again, with the same exact settings. And now let's just apply that luminance. So we'll open LRGB combination. Disable RGB, of course. And add Deconvoluted L. And now we could boost luminance by a lot, but I really think 0.47 is a good bet for very soft. And don't enable Chrominance noise reduction, because we can take care of that later with AC, D, and R. Okay, so let's just look before and after. Maybe let's boost our lightness a little bit more. Alright, and that already looks really good. So let's save that as Luminance LRGB. Alright, so now that we have our stretched LRGB image, it's time for my favorite part of processing, and that's multiscale processing. The first thing we want to do is just apply an HDR, and then we'll want to do 2 lightness and lightness mask. And to create an adequate mask protection, we'll go to range selection, and we want to put fuzziness all the way up to 100. There, that looks good. Then we'll do a very slight convolution. I think 2 and 2 should do the trick, and it looks like it will. So we'll apply that mask. And let's do our HDR. Let's see before and after. Yeah, that looks good. And perhaps let's apply maybe one more. Let's see how it looks. Let's see. I think maybe a blend between the two, and so let's just clone that image right there. Get rid of the mask. And then let's blend it 70-40, 70-30, sorry, bad math on my part. Okay, and so we'll just do 0.7 times our first image plus 0.3 times our second image. Okay, and then I want to replace this image. And that looks good. Looks very, very good. And so now let's just save that as HDR. Alright, and so now it's time for true multiscale processing. I'm going to do 4 iterations, I think, but we'll see as we move along. So first, let's just identify that as iteration 1 and extract the luminance from it. This will be our mask. And I think I'll auto stretch it just a bit to have better stretching. Alright, so that's auto stretch just a bit. I'll close that. Close that as well. Alright, now it's time to clone this image. And let's set that as small scale. Alright, so now we need to actually extract the small scales from this image. And to do that, we're going to use multiscale median transfer. So we're going to use 5 layers and disable the residual. And so that will just only leave everything below 32 pixel size, which should get rid of most of our stars. Okay, and it looks like that did a good job. And now let's create our large scale image. So create a new image. I've already named it large scale. And let's just subtract the small scales from our original image. And this is our large scale image that we'll be working with now. I want to minimize that because I'll use it a lot later. And so we can minimize small scale. We can minimize the first iteration. And we'll apply this mask right here, and let's do some curves. Okay, so we first want to do a little bit of brightening, I think. Not too much. I think this should be fine. And then saturation boost. A little bit more, I think. That looks quite good. And I think maybe we'll reset the lightness, but do a little more saturation, as that wasn't really a saturated image. That looks generally okay. Maybe it's a little oversaturated, but that's why we'll balance it out. Okay, so we can close the mask now. Yeah, we don't care about that. And now, pixel math again. And now, this is the fun part. Rescale result, replace the target image, and now iteration 1 plus large scale plus small scale. Yeah. Okay. So now let's see what our first iteration of multiscale processing has done. It has dimmed these stars a little bit, which I don't like. So instead of saying rescale result, what we're going to do is say iteration 1 is half of it, and then large scale plus small scale is the other half of our image, and we'll see if that's any better. And that does look a bit better, but our stars are saturated, and so I think rescaling the result is our way to go. Okay. Okay, and so, oh, I forgot to rescale it. So that's what our first iteration of multiscale processing has done. And so, let's just save that iteration 1. Okay, and now let's move on to our second one. This one I think we're going to make a little more aggressive. So let's rename this iteration 2. And I'll clone it and name that small scale. Do a multi-scale median transfer on that. Alright, and now let's create our large scale images. So let's open Pixel Math and create new image. I don't want to rescale this. And let's just subtract the small scale again. Alright, and there we go. And so that's our large scale image. And now, to make this iteration more aggressive, we're going to extract the luminance mask from the large scale image. This will just create more overall brightness. And so let's auto stretch it and see if we can do anything with it. Oh, and we can. So, right, and there goes our mask. And I'll apply that mask. And now, let's do some curves. So, let's move lightness up by a good amount. And I think saturation as well. Okay, that does look really good now. So I think we can leave it as that. And again, I do like saturation in my images, so I think I'll push it a little more. Okay, that does look good. So let's remove that mask and get rid of that. And let's apply all our processing to the second iteration. Rescale result as normal. And then iteration 2 plus the large scale image plus the small scale image. And I want to replace the target image. And look, that looks a lot nicer. Better star color, smaller stars. Overall, a good image. Now we're going to enhance some smaller scale structures. So, I want to close that. I would like to close this as well. Let's call this iteration 3. Alright, so now let's extract the luminance from this. And let's create a range mask. And so let's just reset range mask to our original settings. And we'll move lower limit up until we see. And I think that does look good. That looks very solid to me. So that's our range mask. And now let's just blur it a bit with Atra's wavelets transform. So we're going to target 6 layers. Blur it, and we're going to remove everything but the residual. And this leaves only large scale structures. That shouldn't take too long. I think we can blur it a little bit more. And maybe even a little bit more. Yeah, and that does look good. Okay, so that's our range mask. And now let's create our star mask. So what we want to do is we find, this is about 0.61. This is about 0.62. So we'll do star mask with, I think, 0.5. You don't want it to be exactly the median, the middle star core. Yeah, this one is about 0.6. So subtracting 0.1 is generally a good rule of thumb. So I'll just apply star mask. Alright, so this is our star mask. So we can just delete that luminance and close the star mask process. Alright, now pixel mask time. We don't want to rescale the result this time. And so we're going to create our super mask. And so we'll just add that range mask and that star mask. Again, don't rescale the result. This is what mine looks like. I think it's a generally good mask. I like it. So we'll save that, just in case. Alright, and now it's time for some processing. We can close all those masks except the super mask. And now we'll clone the image as normal and create our small scale image. We'll extract the small scales as normal again. Alright, so this is our small scale image. Let's create our large scale image. And so let's just subtract the small scales once again. Okay, so now we can close small scale and our original. So what we're going to try to do now is enhance some of that awesome faint dust around the main nebula. So we'll apply this mask and then invert it. Okay, I don't want to see that mask. And then what we'll do is we'll open local histogram equalization. I think a kernel radius of around Maybe 150 is actually a little bit better. 175 for compromise. And then we'll put the amount at 0.7 just to start, and then we'll apply that and see how it looks. Alright, so this is with and without. Do think it was maybe a tad bit strong, and so we'll just lower contrast to maybe 1.7 and put this down to 0.6, and we'll see how it goes. Okay, that does look a little bit better. Yeah, I do like that. And so now let's just do a little bit of curves on that. So maybe bring RGB up a little, maybe up a little bit. I think that should be good, and let's up the saturation. We have that nice faint blue dust there. Alright, and now it's time to see what our iteration has done. So again, rescale the result, replace the target image, and we'll add the iteration, large scale, and small scale. The reason we add these iterations is just to balance out the image and hope we don't get artifacts. Okay, so it does look like everything's been spread out, and we can easily fix the lack of brightness here with a slight curves transformation. I think that looks good. So don't think I need a fourth iteration, but I'll try just in case. Okay, so let's clone that image and call it iteration 4. Oop, that's not good. And let's clone it and call that small scale. And do the usual multiscale on it. Alright, and now let's just do some pixel math. Don't rescale the result, create a new image, and let's create. Okay. That's our large scale image. So let's apply the mask and invert it. And let's do local histogram equalization with a slightly larger kernel to affect larger sizes. Right? And that really does look good. It really did add something. So I'm happy with that. I think doing a fourth was a good idea. And so now let's just do the usual curves. Really slight. We don't want to overdo the mask, as you can really see that's not correct. I think this is generally good. Up the saturation. It looks pretty solid. That's not good. But okay, so let's remove that mask and see what our last and final iteration looks like. Pixel math, of course, rescale the result, replace the target image, and just put in the equation. And yes, that does look quite good. although it does have some emphasis on stars, and there's some weird purple stars there, but I think that's okay. That does look very good. So, now we're going to do one of my favorite scripts, which is the easy star reduction script. And we're going to want to make sure that it's on the atom blocks the emphasis mode, and we'll run. And remember, StarNet needs to be installed. Alright, so our stars have been reduced. So actually, I just want to see what's been done. It does look really, really good, so we'll save that as star reduction. Let's do maybe a little bit more curves. And saturation boost, of course. Oh, I did not mean to do that. There's what I meant to do. Okay, and now time for some finishing touches. So I do think we need some noise reduction. So we'll extract a luminance mask. And apply that here. Inverted, of course. And now we'll open our preview. And now let's use adaptive contrast-driven noise reduction. So we want a standard deviation of 2 for lightness, 4 for chrominance. And of course this is much too strong, and so let's do 0.5 and 0.5 for this noise reduction, and let's test it out. And let's see. You can see that the noise has been really successfully reduced. I think that's as far as I'm willing to go. So let's delete that preview. And next we should just do some selective sharpening. Okay, so this is our denoised image. Let's remove that mask. And let's use a range mask. Again, for this, I think I'm willing to go a little bit farther. And let's move smoothness up to about there. This mask doesn't have to be perfect because sharpening is never perfect anyway. Okay, and so let's use multiscale linear. Is it linear? No, let's use multiscale median transfer. So let's reset the settings. And let's do a very, very slight bias increase, and that will help with our sharpening. It will also boost the stars a little bit, but again, I think that's perfectly fine. Okay, so we've sharpened the image, and let's just see how we've done. So before and after. That looks pretty good. So let's remove that mask. And now let's just use the dark structure enhance script. And I think 2 iterations of 0.1 should do it. Let's also extract the map to see what we're doing. Alright, so we've just enhanced our dark structures. This is before, and this is after. I think it looks quite good, and this is where we've enhanced it. I think maybe a more slight curves transformation, then I could call this image done. And there we go.